This is the Floridaville. Get to know the people behind the Florida names you know. I'm your host, Rosanna Catalano. On today's episode, we get to know Michael Patterson, a longtime healthcare executive who now runs a global cannabis company that is involved in all aspects of the industry, from cultivation and processing to licensing, banking, research, logistics, and more. We are recording remotely today rather than in our podcast recording studio. I'm in my home in Tallahassee, and our guest today is Michael Patterson, who's speaking to us from his office in Vero Beach. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
You are the Chief Executive Officer for the U.S. Cannabis Pharmaceutical Research and Development Company. I've heard you describe your company as the general contractor of the cannabis industry. Can you explain to our listeners what you mean by that?
Sure. When I started U.S. Cannabis in 2014, a lot of people had the idea in the cannabis space is you can do one of three things. You can grow the product, you can process the product into other products like oils and gels, or you could sell the product. Well, in any industry, we all realize there's a whole list of other jobs and skills and things that are needed to create an infrastructure. And so with my background in healthcare, I knew that that infrastructure was going to have to be put into place. So our company focuses on what I call are the choke points of the industry, and we work with companies to be able to fix those. For example, with international trade, with banking, some cultivation, some regulatory issues, as well as new economic development plans to work with legislators and other people to show them this is going to be the future. So we specifically tried not to be what I call as a one-trick pony, because my background in healthcare led me to see where the future is going to come in cannabis. So we work with companies all over the world in all different types of aspects in the industry. And I know as we talked offline, you and I are going to get into those as we talk.
The last couple of years during the Florida legislative session, I've seen lawmakers move away from the idea that marijuana and cannabis are bad and pharmaceutical opioids are good. In fact, the script has been flipped. What do you think contributed to this new way of thinking about cannabis?
Facts. I mean, a lot of times what we're seeing is the Prohibition Hangover is starting to weaken. And my definition of the Prohibition Hangover is the ideology and the thought process that has been given to the media for the last 60, 70 years, saying that cannabis is bad and bad things are going to happen. I think when now this is 100% legal for medical reasons in Florida, it's legal in 33 different states medically, and it's legal in 11 states recreationally. I think people are smart and they realize the sky didn't fall, the world didn't end. And so we see this as a safer use of medicine rather than opiates, because opiates kill thousands of people a day. Cannabis has not killed one person in human history ever. And so there's a lot of reasons for that scientific side. But the main reason is that our bodies have what they call an endocannabinoid system, and cannabis or marijuana has cannabinoids. So what that means is our body has a lock and key system to accept cannabis as a medicine. Therefore, it doesn't react to where it decreases our breathing to the point where we would die, or increase or decrease heart rates, or things that opiates would do that could be life-threatening.
I have to tell you, as a former criminal prosecutor, it's taken me a bit of time to get this right in my own head and in my own way of thinking now that Florida has legalized medical marijuana and now hemp. For our listeners unfamiliar with these terms, could you explain to them what the difference is between medical marijuana and hemp?
Sure. So marijuana and hemp are what I call cousins. They're plant cousins. So the main difference with hemp, or the actual legal definition, is hemp has less than 0.3% THC, or tetrahydrocannabidiol. It's hard to pronounce. Or THC, what most people know, that's the stuff that gets you high. Hemp has less than 0.3%. So hemp is primarily an industrial product. Hemp makes over 25,000 different products. It can make, instead of using petroleum for oil, we could use hemp. We could actually run our cars on using hemp oil. We could actually make biodegradable plastics. We can make our food through hemp. We can make our homes through hemp, our clothes through hemp. So hemp is going to be a revolutionary product that you're going to start seeing used more often. In cannabis or marijuana, typically has more than 0.3% THC and is primarily used as a medicine. As we all know, it can get a bad name if people get high to where that THC affects them in different ways. But overall, science has learned that medicinally, this can actually help a lot of different ailments due to that endocannabinoid system. For example, we've seen clinical research to show that it can actually help with chronic pain. It can help with Dravet syndrome, which is a seizure disorder for young children. It can help in a lot of different ways to decrease inflammation throughout the body because it's a natural anti-inflammatory medicine. So as we are learning more and more about Western medicine, is inflammation is the cause of a lot of long-term illnesses. And so we're hoping that the use of cannabis over time will decrease the use of brand name drugs because they won't be needed as much. Because typically what we're finding in states where cannabis is legal, the average patient goes down to two to three prescription drugs per month when they start to use medical cannabis.
Interesting. So one of the things that I'm seeing now in the grocery stores and the pharmacy, when we used to go, and it wasn't during the time of coronavirus, we see something called CBD oil. How does CBD oil play into this?
It's a great question. So cannabis and hemp are made up of a bunch of things called cannabinoids, or their chemical structures. And so cannabis has over 100 cannabinoids and hemp has about 100 cannabinoids as well. CBD, or cannabidiol, is one of those cannabinoids. It's like the rock star of cannabinoids for now. And so what CBD is, it's one cannabinoid that benefits the body in a lot of different ways. Some people it helps with chronic pain. Other people say it helps with opiate withdrawal. But the main factor that people do realize is it doesn't get you, quote, high. You don't feel different typically by taking CBD. The main challenge with CBD is everybody can be affected differently. And what I mean by that is, say if you have chronic pain, you may have to take 200 milligrams every dose to get the same effect that I would only need 20 milligrams, because our endocannabinoid system, everybody's different. It's not like, typical medicine and what you think of in the pharmacy where one size fits all. You take one 10 milligram tablet of something and it'll help everybody the same exact way. Well, that's the difference between cannabis and specifically CBD is different people need different amounts of CBD to get the same effect.
When you ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, they usually don't say, I want to run an international cannabis company.
Yes, they do, Rosanna. They do all the time.
What did you want to be when you were a kid?
Well, let me tell you. So I thought about that it was a couple years ago. And I'm like, if somebody would have told me that when I was in my 20s, what I'd be doing now, I would never believe them. But when I started out, when I was younger, I wanted to be I wanted to do something in sports medicine, whether it be physical therapy. I actually didn't understand what occupational therapy was at the time. But when I got to East Carolina University, which is in North Carolina, it's the Pirates, if that's the mascot, if anybody knows. I originally was physical therapy, and I moved into occupational therapy, because occupational therapy deals more with function as a holistic person. So to give you an example, physical therapy, if you have a stroke, they teach you how to walk again. The occupational therapist is the one who's going to teach you how to eat again, dress again, stand at the sink to be able to brush your teeth, to do all your daily living skills. And so for me, I like that idea of being able to help and give back. And so that's kind of where my focus was. And then cannabis didn't come until a lot later.
Well, I detect a bit of a Southern accent. Did you spend part of your childhood in the South?
Yeah, grew up in North Carolina and lived in the same house with my parents and my sister and brother. I have an identical twin brother. He actually lives in Boynton Beach. And then my sister lives in Barcelona, Spain. So we grew up there and then moved to Florida at 22, right out of college, and never left.
What was your childhood like with your brother, your twin brother, and your sister and your family? It sounds like you had a close-knit family.
We did, but let me tell you, if anybody has young boys, oh my gosh, all we did was fight all the time. So, and we was always a competition. So imagine everywhere you go, everybody wants to compare you. Who's the fastest? Who's the smartest? Who's the this? Who's the that? And so, we played sports, all growing up, any type of ball sport, we were involved with, and every season had a different sport. And so, from what I remember, my mother was actually the breadwinner, and my dad worked from home and did some accounting work on his own. And so he kind of helped raise us. And so we mainly It was somewhat independent to where we were expected to do a lot on our own. But I got to say, it was a very happy time. We were definitely middle class. We were not upper class by any means. We didn't want for anything. We had a house. We had a roof over our heads. But we learned the value of $1 and we learned the value of hard work. And so that's what I remember, is that whatever we were involved in, you had to, whatever you started, you had to finish. And it gave us, I feel, a hard, strong work ethic, specifically competing with my brother all the time. But I got to say, overall, it was it was a very good childhood.
Well, your brother is not on this podcast today and cannot provide any rebuttal. So who is the fastest?
Well, of course, I am. Okay. So he would definitely say the same thing. Now, he shaves his head now, and I still have hair. So he and I make fun of each other all the time about that. So when we're together, it's just, so we've passed this down to our children. So my daughter's 20, she goes to University of Florida, and his son's 15 and 11. So when we all get together, we all kind of pick on each other in a loving way. So, but we all have a good time with it, and we kind of learn to support each other.
That's nice. I saw that you played varsity rugby in college. How old were you when you started to play rugby?
That's a great question. From my brother, I got involved because he went to Appalachian State University, which is in the mountains of North Carolina. And I was on a varsity soccer scholarship at East Carolina. But my senior year, I decided not to play because with occupational therapy, back then, your classes were decided for you. So you didn't have a choice on where the classes were. And most of my classes were in the afternoon. So I couldn't go to practice. I knew I wasn't going to play pro soccer. So he said, why don't you go out and play rugby? And the main reason he wanted me to play is because the state championship that year for all the college rugby schools was at East Carolina. And so he wanted to beat me. So that's why he wanted me to play. So I started playing in college, and just for the record, his team, Appalachian State, didn't win a game in the state tournament, and we ended up winning the whole entire state tournament. So we never got to play because he wasn't good enough. But anyway, we started playing then. And then
you're taking advantage of the fact that he is not here.
Absolutely. 100%. I am. So when I got out of college.
He can rebut in the comments.
Trust me, he will totally rebut. We'll be listening to this and it'll be like, whatever, that's not true. Yes, it is, Mark. You just don't remember. So anyway, I started playing in college and really liked it. And then I did internships for my occupational therapy degree in Pittsburgh. And I played a little bit there, and I played in Augusta, Georgia. And then when we moved to Florida, I played in adult leagues. And so I played up until I was 27. And then if you're not familiar, in adult rugby leagues in Florida, you have to do a lot of traveling because it's a large state. So, when I had my daughter, it just became too much to do. But my brother ended up playing until his 40s. And now he is a coach, and he's one of the founders of a rugby league called Wellington Rugby Union, or Wellington Rugby Club, which is similar to like a soccer league or a football league where they have different teams at different ages. So that's what we're starting to see, rugby become a big youth sport in the state of Florida.
Oh, that's nice. I didn't realize that. Mm-hmm. What was your first job out of college?
That's a great question. So my first job out of college, I was a occupational therapist. So that was my degree, but I was a traveling occupational therapist. So I was doing an internship in Augusta, Georgia, and I had one of the other therapists who came to me at this rehab hospital I was working at. She goes, hey, I just got hired from a company in Florida. Do you want to talk to them? Because they're looking for other occupational therapists. And at the time, I was scheduled to go work in Montgomery, Alabama, and because I had a scholarship, which I had to work for 2 years and pay it back. But between you and me, I really didn't want to live in Alabama. So I said, hey, I'll come down and look in Florida. So they flew me down, and I flew into Jacksonville. And I remember the sky was just so big because I'd only been to Florida a couple times. And so in North Carolina, you have windy roads and it's not flat. So you really can't see how big the sky is. And so as an outsider, for me, I thought that was great. Of course, I love the weather. And so I ended up accepting the job. And so the way it worked is I would cover all the maternity leaves, or if there was a temporary opening at a certain facility, I would come in for this company and I would travel all over the state. So I've been lucky enough to live all the way from Amelia Island in the north of Florida, all the way down to Pompano Beach area in southern Florida, and pretty much anywhere in between. I've been able to see the entire state and actually live in different areas of the state.
Wow. I actually grew up in Pompano Beach.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm familiar with where you've been. What do you think was the most important skill you learned in that first job that you still use to this day?
interacting with people. The biggest thing that I see coming out is, especially the younger people, they're so used to dealing with their phones, that initial contact and the initial confidence of what you're doing. To give you an example, I was at 23, I was doing a rotation for this company in Kissimmee, and there was about 30 therapists there, and out of those 30 therapists, there was only about 7 of us from the United States, believe it or not, because this is back when there weren't a lot of therapists, and they needed to bring in from overseas. So the rehab manager had to go on maternity leave. And I was there just to cover patients, but I'd only been there for a couple months, and they asked me to be the interim rehab manager, and I was only 23. And I think the reason it is because I was so confident and I was willing to listen, and I could hold a room in the fact that I was used to talking with adults. I was used to dealing with adult conversations, and that confidence, I think that's the number one thing that helped me be able to get through this new area when getting out of college, because it doesn't matter how old you are. If you're not confident in who you are and your abilities, I think it really, really shows.
I think you're right. How did you become involved in nursing home administration? Because I know you made the transition from occupational therapist to this different career in nursing home administration. How did you do that?
They were kind of synonymous, because when I got out of college and moved to be a traveling occupational therapist, my first assignment was in a nursing home in St. Augustine. So I'd never even been in a nursing home. And so it was a new facility, and I remember being there, and I said, "Wow, this place is great. It's a rehab center. It's brand new." And they go, "No, this is a nursing home." I'm like, "No, this isn't a nursing home. Nursing homes are drab and dreary and smell like piss." I mean, I was being honest. They go, "No, this is a nursing home." And so when I got into it, I was like, you know what? I enjoy this. I like this. And if you haven't been around people in the nursing homes, and I commend anybody who's listening who's in that industry, because it's an extremely difficult industry, you have to be a certain type of person. You have to be willing to go help people and be willing to put yourself in an environment where, think about it. How many people that you know work in a nursing home, people care what they do, or people look at them and say, "Oh, I'm sure that I'm proud that person is working in a nursing home." It's just not a glamorous position. It's not a position where you get a lot of praise. So it takes a certain type of person to be able to work in there. So when I came out of college, I was working in these as a therapist. And then when I moved up and worked for the company called Avante, which is based in Florida, I moved up into doing more compliance work and doing some utilization management, because in any corporation, you have to figure out your utilization so you can stay in business. So I went to the officers at the time, and the rule in the nursing home industry is that you have to have a nursing home administrator licensed at all times. So if you let somebody go, you fire somebody, you have to have somebody ready to go. So I came to them and I said, "Hey, would you pay for me to go get my licenses in North Carolina, Virginia, and Florida," because that's where our facilities were, and New Jersey, "and I can be your backup nursing home administrator." And they thought that was a great idea, because that way it gives them more flexibility if they need to make changes. So I had to go through what they call as administrator and training program, which is a year of internship within the company. And then I could sit for the national board exam. And then from that board exam, specific states require you to sit in their state for an exam. So in North Carolina, Virginia, I had to sit for those exams. So I passed those. And so that's kind of how I got started. I think that was around 2003. And then over time, I started moving up into the nursing home company to move more into operations in the nursing home. And at 32, I ended up taking over to be the chief operating officer of Avante. And at that time, we were doing about $230 million in total revenue. And let me tell you, the nursing home industry is the most litigious and regulated on the planet. So I really cut my teeth in learning how to deal with a lot of stress. At that time, we were going through a federal investigation of former people who worked with us who were doing potentially nefarious things. And I was being told that it was going to be pinned on me and I could potentially go to prison and all these different things, where I didn't know anything about what was going on because it was before my time. So I really learned to grow up, I guess you'd say, even in my 30s, to take on that type of responsibility. And it wasn't just me now. We had 2,500 employees. So I had to really learn at a young age, at least professionally, to where having a job at that level is not all about the money. You really have to understand what you're doing, because a lot of people are depending on you to make the right decisions for their livelihood.
That must have been a lot of pressure,
Yes.
but it must have prepared you for what you do now.
Oh, it was great. It was so good, because it made me realize, in the nursing home industry, you have to realize it's all about systems. And so once you understand the system, you have to duplicate that system everywhere you go. For example, we would have audits, and people hear about this. The state of Florida comes in and slaps people with fines. Well, those are unannounced visits and announced visits. And if you don't pass those surveys, then you could lose your business. And so you really learn about systems, and you learn how to interact with people and to follow up with those systems. I've seen so many people who are younger now who haven't gone through that trial by fire, so to speak, and they don't understand how you have to stay on top of your systems. And one of the things we did most is called MBWA, which is managed by walking around. Show your face. Let people know who you are, why you're there, what is the mission of this company, why are you doing what you're doing, and allow them to interact with you. And so that's what I learned at an early age. And I think it really helped me for what I'm doing now, is because I have to think about systems that haven't even really been created, and to really think about the next stage that's coming. Because one of the things I did hate about that job in the nursing home business is you literally live waiting for the next shoe to drop. You don't know where it's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. Case in point, so we had a facility in Lake Worth, and I get a call at like 9:00 at night, and they said, well, one of our patients in the dementia wing smashed the window and jumped out the window, and now nobody can find him. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So we luckily we had to get the police involved. We found that person, and the person ended up being okay. But then another case came in Orlando where they called me and they said, hey, Michael, we're not going to like this. I'm like, okay, well, you can tell me. They said, we just had a lab test came back for bird flu. I don't know if you remember the bird flu years ago. And they said, we're going to have to put that person in isolation. I said, no. I said, you need to ask them to retest it. They said, why? I said, because this would be the first case in the United States. So I'm going to be on every news station on America in front of that nursing home in about an hour. So please retest it. And they retested it. And luckily it was negative. So you literally would deal with these calls every day to where somebody's life was in jeopardy, whether it be a patient, whether it be mine. I actually got threatened death threats from family members if their family member died or one of our staff made a mistake. So it's one of those things where it gave me a really thick skin that made me realize that a lot of people are just very angry at the situation, and I learned a lot how to diffuse really, really tense situations.
This episode of The Floridaville is brought to you by Rocket Ship Consultants. Let us help you launch your career, your business, your political campaign, or your podcast. For more information, visit our website at rocketshipconsultants.com.
If someone were to look at your resume on paper, they might not understand how you jumped from nursing home administration to cannabis, although you've given us some examples of your leadership and what you were exposed to. I would view your resume and think to myself, this is a person that must be very confident in his abilities to make this type of career change. How do you see it?
It wasn't like that at all. So I had a stint where I worked for a private merchant bank after I left the nursing home chain. And this merchant bank would come in and they would buy assets and take over assets. And they had some assets in the healthcare space. And so they had a home health in Daytona and Jacksonville, and they wanted to bring on some labs and bring on some other home health businesses. So they needed somebody in the industry to help run them. So for me, it was great because it was a good transition into cannabis, because I learned a lot about global international trade markets. I learned a lot about, because they were involved in everything. I learned a lot about billion-dollar deals and how those are put together. I learned a lot about why deals fail. And it was a really good learning experience for me to know the money side of healthcare in general. And so the transition for me came in when creating U.S. Cannabis is that I saw so much death and destruction with opioids for so many years in nursing homes. And I knew that if anybody was going to be able to make a dent in this industry in cannabis in the United States, they really have to understand how the system works, meaning medically. They need to understand how doctors think. They need to understand how regulators think. And so I knew I had all that knowledge. The challenge is, of course, it wasn't legal at that time. So when John Morgan came up, the lawyer out of Orlando, and started making the initial push in 2014 to legalize cannabis, I told myself, if it ever comes to Florida, I need to get involved. And so it is one of those things where I always was very passionate about cannabis. I was always very passionate that I felt like I see the benefits in this, and I also felt as if I didn't take this leap now and be what I call the tip of the sword, then so many people with my types of backgrounds will never be able to come after me, because I don't expect people to do what I did to get into the industry and risk everything and literally live day to day and not knowing where I was going to make my next dollar for a long time. I understand they can't make that leap. But for me, this is something that I felt it got to the point, Rosanna, to where I felt like I was more scared of never trying than failing. And so when I got to that point, I started saying, well, then I'm going to move forward. And so it was started in small segments. I started, created the company and went out and did some initial marketing. And then I started using a lot of those contacts from the nursing home industry, and as well as my stint in the merchant bank. We were working with this group of Indian tribes out west to do their nursing homes and assisted livings. We were going to build them for them. So I contacted those people, and they were extremely interested in hemp and cannabis. So we started consulting with Indian tribes, and that turned into other referrals, because what I started to learn is the cannabis industry back in 2013, 2014, there were no rules. So what we understand as pharmacy and medicine today was nothing like they had back then. I mean, they considered medical cannabis stuff you grew outside with no lab testing and no quality control. And so no consistency. And so for me, coming from a highly regulated industry, it's literally at that moment, I said, I could literally see the future. So I could see the point where states would legalize and countries would start doing international trade. And it's so exciting because now we're at that point. We've got 42 countries where this is legal. You got 33 states here in the U.S. where this is legal. And so I go all over the world and speak at conferences. And it's so exciting because I knew this day would come. And I just had to figure out a way to get started to get to where I am now.
Share with us the projects your company is currently focused on.
We are doing so many different things, which is so exciting. So one of our biggest projects right now, we have a joint venture with a company out of the Seychelles. And if you're unfamiliar with the Seychelles, it's east of Africa. And it's called MGMC, which is Malawi Gold Management Corporation, or MGMC Pharma. We have 5 licenses to do cultivation, processing, and international distribution of cannabis. And so as of last week, we successfully shipped the first ever THC or marijuana shipment from Lesotho, which is the little country inside of South Africa, to the country of Australia. It was the first one that legally went. So it's a very exciting time. We're also working on shipments going into Europe. And so that's taking a lot of our time, because we realized through this partnership of we have 5 licenses in Africa. We just made a purchase here in Florida, which we're very excited about with that company, as well as one in Portugal. So we're opening up international trade. Another project we're working on is a cryptocurrency project, and it's I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's regarding making cannabis safer in a lot of different areas, so you don't have to use cash as much. Also, we're currently working with curriculum development for a major university in the Midwest to have a cannabis educational program that's going to be certified, that people can go to and get a 2 or 4 year degree. So working on curriculum with that. And right now, also, we developed a project here in Florida to help with kind of putting Florida on the map for hemp and cannabis, more of a research zone, like a new Silicon Valley that we want to work. And we're trying to work through Nikki Fried's office, the Commissioner of Agriculture, with. And one of the projects I'm working on personally is I'm writing a book with 5 others to do kind of like a textbook that you would have if you were going to into cannabis management or cannabis business. And so it's a good overview of the entire industry from the beginning of the plant all the way through the global markets, as well as kind of everything in between, to give you that good baseline of knowledge to get started.
Amazing. And lots of things on your plate.
Mm-hmm.
The cannabis industry is being touted as the next big thing for Florida's economy and for agriculture. Do you think the infrastructure and the logistics are in place to help this industry take off here in Florida?
Yes and no. So do we have the infrastructure for hemp, which is grown outdoors like corn or wheat or anything else? Yes. Do we have the political will to do things differently than other states? I don't think so. So let me explain. You got 2 different businesses. You got hemp, which is grown outdoors, agricultural, industrial product, where I think Florida could be a major leader in that industry long term, because we have in a great climate. The challenge is nobody's grown hemp in Florida legally in 80, 90 years. So the concern is hemp typically grows well in a climate such as North Carolina, Oregon, Washington, Kentucky. And so the challenge is seeing how it's going to grow here. One of the things that we want to do is we feel that Florida will be able to compete on a long-term scale with R&D or research. And so we've proposed creating a new research zone that's going to go from Brevard County, Titusville, Melbourne area down to St. Lucie County, Fort Pierce area, to be able to be the new Silicon Valley or Research Triangle Park for the planet. Because with me and going around the world, I've learned that there's really not an area on the planet where everybody can come together and exchange ideas in hemp and cannabis. And so it's something that's sorely needed because cannabis is illegal in so many different ways and illegal in so many different ways that even if it's legal in a country, you may not be able to research it. You may not be able to talk about it. You may lose your job if you do. So we need a safe space where people can come and do research and development that's going to be able to propel the world. And we really want to do it through Florida because specifically on the East Coast between Brevard and St. Lucie counties, you still have enough growth for the next 30 years. You're not tied into where the population's too big. We're not pushed up against the Everglades, and we're still easily accessible from all over the world. You can get to that area from Orlando and Miami in less than an hour and a half. So we looked at that as something that to bring a lot of jobs and economic development to Florida, because if you come out of the gates and just say, hey, we're going to produce a crop and sell it, everybody can do that. You have to do something that's different that's going to set you apart. So we want to be in that area to push Florida into the next evolution of these industries, to be the thought leaders of the globe, to really bring people in here to create jobs.
Very impressive. I know that there's been issues with using banks and credit cards in the traditional way for cannabis companies. Can you explain to our listeners what some of the issues are and how your company is working to solve them?
Yeah, so the main issue is that cannabis is still illegal federally. So if you go to a Wells Fargo or a Bank of America and they work with a cannabis company, they technically can be doing money laundering or performing money laundering if you're dealing with a cannabis business. So if I'm Bank of America or Wells Fargo, why do I want to risk my multi-billion dollar business with some small cannabis operations? So what's caused it to happen is smaller banks, credit unions have gotten involved. And so it's made it more difficult because the FDIC hasn't been that easy to deal with. So we're working through multiple companies, one of which is called Integrated Compliance Solutions. They're based out of Las Vegas, and they're getting ready to go public on the Canadian exchange. They write the cannabis software or the banking software that banks use to be able to take cannabis money and do it legally and safely, because there's a provision in the 2014 FinCEN or Financial Crimes Enforcement Network guidelines, which breaks down how banks can deal with cannabis companies in a pseudo-legal manner. And so ICS has developed that software to be able to have banks kind of follow the KYC and AML. So in banking terms, KYC is know your customer, and AML is anti-money laundering. So they have to focus to keep the banks compliant. And we're actually helping them to kind of promote what they do because we need more banks in the system. I was lucky enough to speak at the first ever Cannabis Banking Summit, which was in Pittsburgh last June. And so I was able to meet with bankers. And I got to tell you, Rosanna, I literally put it on them. I said, look, don't blame me because your grandmother or your kid or your son can't get medical cannabis in the future. We've gone as far as we can, but we need you to come in and really need you guys to pick up the slack. And so afterwards, it was funny because all these bankers came up to me and they were so happy, like, thank you so much. And this was so inspirational. And I was kind of laughing to myself because I basically blamed them because we can't move forward. But what I found is that specifically with this issue is that people want to make a difference in the world and they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. So if I can come to you and say, you know what, you don't have to leave your job. You can still be an accountant or a banker and you can change the world by helping cannabis and helping all these people, then they get really excited because then it's an achievable goal. That's something they can handle. So that's one of the companies. The other company we're working with is a company called Paytrax. And Paytrax is a cryptocurrency that's based out of Oklahoma. And it's very, very close to getting what they call a no action letter. And if it, in simple terms, that's a case through the Securities and Exchange Commission to say that your token is legal. There's only 2 tokens in the United States that have been approved to the SEC. And we're very, very close to getting the 3rd one ever. So basically, we would be able to work with customers and clients to be able to pay for stuff using a cryptocurrency that's equal to $1. So imagine you go to the store, and instead of paying with cash or credit, you can pay with a cryptocurrency on your phone. And so we see this is going to be the future. The challenge in cryptocurrency is you have to be able to make sure it's lawful, because the technology exists. You just have to make it abides by a certain law. So our token will do that. And the ability for that is to be able to, first of all, we want to use it as a beta program in the Oklahoma medical cannabis space, because there's a lot of cash being used. And so one of the benefits for this token is, if you're the government, is that it pays you instantly when a transaction is made. So if you own your own business, you typically pay quarterly sales tax. Well, if you're a government and you can instantly get your sales tax every single day, then you're going to have more access to capital, and you're less likely to have fraud. So we went out and worked with the state of Oklahoma to get this approved. It's been approved by the Oklahoma Tax Commission. It's been approved by the Oklahoma Securities Exchange. So we're very excited about that, because we really need to show this working under cannabis in Oklahoma, move it nationally, and eventually globally, where you can purchase anything with this token.
Do you see that cryptocurrency idea coming to Florida?
Oh, it's going to come everywhere. So once you have a cryptocurrency that's legal like ours, you can buy and use it anywhere. It's just a matter if that person uses it. For example, you go to Walmart. If Walmart uses your cryptocurrency, you'll use it. Just like if they have Visa, you'll use Visa. If they have American Express, you'll use American Express. So what we're going to see eventually is we're going to have a couple cryptocurrencies. They're going to win out the market to where they're going to become the new form of money. And so you'll be able to use that cryptocurrency anywhere in the world. So imagine if you're traveling through Europe and you can always purchase things with a cryptocurrency that's equal to $1, then you never have to worry about the exchange rate going back and forth. And so this is going to make travel easier. It's going to make banking easier. You're basically decentralizing banking. So you don't have to go through banks anymore. That's why there's been a lot of beef about cryptocurrency, because it's called decentralized banking. So you're taking out a lot of the people who currently make money in that system. But it's going to come. It's going to be huge, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But with the right law, it can definitely work. And so that's what we're working to achieve.
You've touched on a lot of areas, from the research to cryptocurrency to logistics. What else can we expect to see in the cannabis industry in the next 5 years, 10 years, 25 years?
The biggest thing you're going to see over the next 5 years is legalization is going to take hold. Now, people always ask me, when's it going to be legal at the federal level in the U.S.? Between you and me, when we have a Democratic president, Senate, and House, it'll be legal. So the Republicans, for some reason, are still against it. They still feel as if, and I'm an independent. I don't pick either side. So the Republicans right now, I think there's still that whole religious aspect, thinking it's bad for you, not wanting to help cannabis businesses. But what people don't see is we're losing ground in internationally. When I go speak overseas, I'm one of the biggest speakers on the circuit, I guess you'd say. And it's a small circuit right now. There's not a lot of people doing what I do, but I'm usually the only American speaking. And it's kind of ironic, because 90% of all legal sales are in the United States of cannabis, but yet nobody goes outside the country to talk about it. So what I see happening in the next 5 years is international trade is going to explode. When that happens, you're going to see a lot of people from the U.S. crying foul, because they can't participate in international trade. So they're not going to make any money. That's going to push the United States to make a decision to open this up. What I envision happening in the next 5 years is medical cannabis will become legal at the federal level, and then recreational cannabis will not be legal at the federal level, which will create a lot of problems. However, I definitely say that Florida will be legal with recreational cannabis in the next 5 years, and that's going to lead to more people using cannabis, which will decrease the price that people will have to pay. And we'll also see, what I see is going to happen is a decrease in prescription drug use, because as I mentioned before, when you start taking medical cannabis, you typically decrease the other medications you take. And also, a study was done out of Michigan, which shows that 40% of people using recreational cannabis are using it for medical reasons, basically to self-medicate, with the number one reason being sleep. So I see a lot more usage over the next 10 years. We'll definitely have legalization, where you're going to have international trade in and out of the United States. You're going to have an Amazon type service that will deliver cannabis right to your door. You'll have choices of all different types of strains and types and things that you would like. You're going to see socially, you're going to see people getting together and having cannabis parties like they have beer. And so cannabis will be just as common as having beer or cigarettes at a party. And you'll see this evolution of society accepting this as something that's an acceptable substance to use across all societies, specifically in Europe and the US. And then in 25 years, you're going to see so many advancements in medicine dealing with cannabis and cannabinoids. A lot of the plant has not been studied yet because it's been illegal. You're going to see a lot of medical advancements where there's going to be better medicines, cheaper medicines, and these medicines will primarily be all natural, coming from these new cannabinoids that we're discovering, to where you're going to see this this push back to more all natural pharmaceutical grade medication, and cannabis is going to play a huge role in that.
You mentioned medicine, and I see now that you are the editor of the American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine. Can you tell us how you got involved in that venture?
Well, just to clarify, I'm on the editorial board, so I don't want to make anybody upset. So our editor-in-chief is Dr. Jehan Marcoux. He's the scientist. And so I got involved because the publisher, Kenny Watkins, reached out to me about almost 2 years ago now. And he was a publisher in pharmaceutical publishing. And so he reached out to me because he got on my name through somebody, and then looked me up on LinkedIn. And so he, Kenny and I helped Kenny work through getting the magazine set up, because the pharmaceutical world was coming at this magazine from a certain area of this research. But I was trying to explain to everybody who would listen is that the cannabis industry is not there yet. We don't have the double-blind studies. We don't have the long-term research that you would see from an FDA product just because it's been illegal. So I got involved through Kenny, working through that. And so what I work on now is basically promoting the journal, promoting it to bring awareness, because it's the first ever journal in the United States that's published. It goes to 45,000 U.S. physicians, and it's the first one dedicated to endocannabinoid science. So we really feel that this is something that doctors, nurses, and healthcare practitioners want. They want this knowledge. And so I feel it's my job to help promote it as much as possible. And I work with the scientists on the board to help promote that science. I'm not the scientist. I'll make that very, very clear. So my role is to help promote it and be able to talk the language to the allied health professionals, as well as the business interests around how this journal is going to help push us forward as a society and help make this legal in more places.
We like to end our show with a little fun by asking all of our guests the same 7 questions. What would people be surprised to know about you?
I am a champion bodybuilder. So I got into bodybuilding late at 38, and it was very difficult. I learned a lot about discipline. And so I did my first show and came in last, and my last show I came in first. And so
Congratulations.
A lot of people don't know that. It's not like, well, thank you. So I didn't make any money. I got a little trophy. So that was about it. But it really taught me about discipline, and it really taught me about working as hard as you can, because the one thing in bodybuilding as a sport, it's the only sport I know is you pretty much going to know who's going to win when you show up. So you really have to do your homework. You have to work as hard as you can, because you never know who you're going to go against until the day of the show. And so it taught me to really work as hard as you can and be consistent as you can to make sure you are able to be on top, whether it be in business or other aspects.
When you have guests in town, where is your favorite place to take them?
My favorite place, usually people come into town, they're usually wanting to go to Disney. So I don't know about you, but I had my Disney feel with my daughter. So I let them go on their own. But when they're in Vero Beach, I like to take them to the Vero Beach Hotel. It's a great place to have a drink, have dinner right on the water. And also another great place is called the Ocean Grill. It's been there for about 60 years. It's world famous. The Weather Channel was doing live feeds in the last hurricane from the Ocean Grills. It's just great food. And then also I would say McKee Gardens is a great place here. It's a natural gardens that's been here for about 60 years. It's a great place to spend the afternoon. They have a butterfly garden as well as just natural gardens to walk through. So it's very quiet and relaxing here in Vero Beach.
What is the name of a book you recently read that you could not put down, or the name of a show you enjoyed binge watching?
One of the books I keep coming back to, I read a lot over and over, is Jim Collins' Good to Great. If you haven't read Jim Collins, it's a book that's been out for probably 20 years, but it's just so great in the fact that you learn how to create an organization from the ground up. And I go back to that because as I get into the cannabis side, you kind of go back to what got you here. And a lot of the same business aspects are going to happen in the cannabis space. Also, believe it or not, I went back to a report from Lominger, and Lominger was an HR service that we used at Avante, and I found about a month ago, and it was my personality inventory. So it was given to all the employees, and I was the COO at the time, and you're judged and graded by your employees. And so going back through that, it's about 200 pages to kind of see where was I at that point, and how can I make myself better now, and the skills I need to work on. And then the binge show, I've gotten into Billions on Showtime. I started watching that, and I really enjoyed that to kind of see that show. But that's kind of what I binged during coronavirus right now.
Among your close family and friends, what are you best known for?
I'd say with my close friends, I think it's having a sense of humor. I worked in such a strict organization and dealing with nursing homes and not being able to be creative is one of the things that I think they see now. Also, specifically on cannabis, and I can't turn it off. It's what I found and I love, and it's my purpose in life is to do this. I found my why. So I think they see that, and they also see my drive to succeed, and I've just determined not to give up. But I would say the first thing I would say would be my sense of humor.
I've seen some of that here today. If you have a nickname, who gave it to you?
I gave myself the nickname of Pure Player, which is Playa. And it was mainly for, I did that when my daughter was young, because as raising a daughter as a single dad, one of the biggest things I wanted to give my daughter was self-confidence. And I remember telling her that when she was young. I said, the best thing I can ever give you is self-confidence. So the only way I felt like one of the ways I could do that was to show her that her father had self-confidence. So I would sit there and call myself Pure Player. And when you go to a Wi-Fi, your Wi-Fi, my Wi-Fi name was Pure Player. So when all her friends came over, they'd be like, are we going to Pure Player's house? So we just had fun with it. So I used it as something as a joke, but also to show my daughter that you want to have confidence in what you do. And so I got to say, my daughter is the most confident person you meet. She's very intelligent. She's 20 at Florida. So I feel like I succeeded in my goal of using that nickname.
If you knew you could not fail, what would you attempt?
To be the president of the United States.
What are the top 3 things you love about living in Florida?
The number one is weather. I think I love the weather in the winter, hate it in the summer, but I think a lot of Floridians are like that. I love the diversity of the geography and the people. If you go from Pensacola to Key West, there's so many different diverse places to live. I've been lucky enough to live probably in 7 to 10 different places around the state. Like I mentioned, all the way from Amelia Island to down in South Florida and everywhere in between. And I think that the last one I love is the ease of travel. Everywhere I travel around the world, I can get there from Orlando or Miami. And so I love that in the fact that everywhere I go, everybody knows where Florida is. So that actually helps, because everybody, when you tell them you're from Florida, everybody around the world, they all want to tell you their Disney World story. So it's a great icebreaker. And so that's one of the things I think I like about it.
Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today.
Well, thank you, Rosanna. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Be sure to subscribe to the Floridaville on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook to learn more about the show. Our email address is feedback@thefloridaville.com. This episode was edited by Joy Tootle with Rocket Ship Consultants at rocketshipconsultants.com.